Hey guys, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Life from the perspective of a military family member is way different than a civilian standpoint. Military children and family members give up their hopes and dreams to be able to stand by and support their service member, and it isn't an easy lifestyle for anyone to live. I hope that this podcast is able to help connect the military community and give others just a glimpse into what the military life is like from the perspective of spouses and children. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Grace of Military Child and Life podcast. Today, I'm here with Riley. So, Riley, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yes, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, you are an Army brat. I am an Army brat. So, what's your experience been like as an Army brat?
Being an Army brat is very different than like being a regular child, especially when you move around a lot because you're never in the same place for a long period of time. So it's hard when you have to make new friends, like experiencing the different climate and trying to fit in.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially, to understand at such a young age because you're how old?
I'm 12.
Yeah, so it's really hard to understand at 12, moving around and making new friends. And, the younger you are, I find at least the older I get, the more I'm like, all right, I'm good with just like one or two really good friends. But like when I was little, I was like, okay, I want to be friends with everyone. And so it's very social. But it's hard, moving around and being like, okay, I have my group of friends here, but I'm moving in a couple years or I'm moving next month. And it's like, okay, I have to leave my old friends behind and I have to make new friends now. So it's definitely a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where have you lived? Where do you remember living? Where have you lived? What is that like?
I've lived in 5 different locations, but I mostly remember living in Cuba and Bahrain. Yeah. And so in Cuba, we were like isolated on an island. And I remember like the flights were like so annoying because you would never know when you'd make it on a flight. And so just sitting there waiting to hear if your name's called, it was just so intense, especially being like young. I was in like 1st through 3rd grade at that time. So I didn't understand what was really happening when they wouldn't call us.
Yeah, and there's like a priority list, right? And you have to kind of run through the list. And if you're not up there, there's a good chance you're not getting called.
Yeah. And then living in Bahrain, I remember the first time we got there, everything was going great. And then our luggage didn't show up. And so we had to like buy clothes with our principal. And she was really sweet. And it was just so different because everywhere else has been, all of our stuff has made it with us. And so I wasn't used to that. And they all spoke like a different language. And so it was hard fitting in. Like when you'd go to like the mall, because you see everyone like dressed differently, speaking in Arabic, and you spoke in English. So
yeah, it's definitely a whole different culture, trying to, like you said, fit in and kind of feel like you're a part of it in an extent. But because military kids, we all know we're going to probably end up being moved in a couple years or a couple months or whatever that time frame is like. We all know we're going to end up moving again until you finally get somewhere and you're like, all right, we're staying here for quite a while. But you want to keep kind of, especially in other countries, you want to experience culture. You want to kind of learn what it's like living in another country. But at the same point, you're like, you need to keep your American roots too, because most likely you're going to end up, back in America, so you have to kind of find that balance of, okay, blending into the new culture, but keeping your old roots. And even in America, like, let's be real. I've lived in Ohio, I've lived in Texas, and I've lived in Florida. Each place is so different. I have part of me from each of those. So it's important to kind of blend it all together. Yeah. What is it like, for you, because you mentioned your two main places that you remember the most are Cuba and Bahrain. What's it like moving from country to country to country?
It's very different because most people that like in Cuba when we first moved there, lots of people from America, and so it wasn't really hard to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely different because it was very hot there. There was hardly any rain, and there were different creatures that I've never heard of until I moved there, like
Yeah.
banana rats and iguanas. So
We have
I was,
iguanas in Florida, but yeah.
so I was definitely scared when I first heard that banana rats like ate the wires under your car, or
Mm-hmm.
iguanas. Like I heard a story about an iguana that almost bit a girl's finger because she was feeding it and
Yeah.
stuff. And so that was definitely very scary, especially at a
Yeah.
young age. And then in Bahrain, most of the people have either lived there their entire life, or they're moving soon. Like when I got there, they were moving soon. So I'd become friends with them and then they'd leave, or I'd become friends with them, but wouldn't really understand what they were saying because they spoke
Yeah.
a different language. And English is like their second language.
Yeah. And it's definitely hard, when English is your first language, trying
Mm-hmm.
to learn, even a small portion of another language. Like in high school, you have to take a language. I took Spanish. It went in one ear and out the other ear. Like, I know hola, I know como estás, I know the basic
Mm-hmm.
things to get me by, but you know, it's so hard learning a different language when you have one native language and,
Mm-hmm.
you grow up speaking that. So it's definitely that culture shock feeling of there's so many new things going on around you and you just don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is it like going to school in other countries? Is it the same? Is it different? Do you notice anything weird?
Well, in the schools I went to, they were like Judea based, so they were kind of private, but they weren't like private where you had uniforms. They weren't that private, but they were like
Right.
private schools, and other students had to pay to get into them if they weren't like American. And so we learned different things. Like in Bahrain, when I was in sixth grade, we were learning about ratios in math, and then we were learning about like how the human form like began. But when I moved here and went to a public school in math, they were like behind. So I
Yeah.
already knew ratios, but they were learning them. And then in social studies, we were learning about India and different countries. And I didn't learn that there. So it's definitely different. And I thought like
Yeah.
everyone learned the same thing, but I was wrong. And I found that out very soon.
Yeah, when I went to a public school in Ohio, and when I moved to Texas when I was in 4th grade, you know, it was so different. We didn't learn history in Ohio. We didn't learn science in Ohio. That we had just started learning about the weather in 4th grade in Ohio. Like it was that crazy.
Mm.
And when I moved to Texas, we learned Texas history. So we learned all about the Alamo and, you know, everything to go with Texas. And, we were way further ahead in math. And, when then I moved to Florida, it was like, okay, well, now I have to figure out where I'm going because I went from, a military base school to a school where it's like, all right, now we're back to public school. And
Yeah.
it's also different. And then, sometimes credits don't transfer and you have to retake classes. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge mess where it's like, okay, now we have to figure this out again. And then we move and now we have to figure this out again. Is it hard, going? You mentioned ratios, like you moved and then you were behind, like the other class was behind and you had already learned ratios.
Mm-hmm.
um is it hard being in a classroom and being ahead of the other students that you're
It's
like, I already know this, like let's move on to something harder?
It's definitely strange because whenever you're learning about it, I was like, I already know what to do, and everyone else would be like so confused, and I'd be the only person to understand how to do it. And so
Yeah.
it felt odd, and I was tired of learning about ratios. I was ready to learn about like our next unit, but it was also like better because I could like practice more and
Yeah.
understand a little more how to do it. So it was like odd and it was helpful at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely, weird when you're like, okay, I already know this, like let's move on. But like you said, it's good practice. My fifth grade teacher, she had a sign in her room and we were in Texas, so it was a Tim Duncan quote, who is a famous basketball player from San Antonio. And it said, good, better, best, never let it rest until your good gets better and your better is best. And so that was always like I would walk into class, I would look at the sign and I would keep learning. But, everything is, everyone says practice makes perfect, which is true to an
Mm-hmm.
extent, but practice makes like it doesn't necessarily always make you
Mm-hmm.
perfect because you're never going to be perfect at things, but practice is always good. Practice, it's always helpful to review things and to learn things again. And especially, learn ratios from someone else because you
Mm-hmm.
might understand something a little bit more. What is it like, so you do have an older sister, and
Yeah.
what is it like, you know, I always said it's like having a built-in best friend, right? So moving from place to place to place to place, what is it like having a sibling for you?
It's I don't know how to explain because like she's like in high school and so I'm in middle school and so if we went to the same school it would be like awesome because like know at least someone,
Yeah.
but we don't go to the same school. So it was like when we first moved, it was like I have to make my own friends. I can't be friends with her friends. And so it was definitely odd. And traveling, like me and her would like talk and express our feelings about not wanting to move
Yeah.
and stuff. But it was definitely different because we went to the same school like when we lived in Cuba or Bahrain because our schools were connected. It was like a K through 12 grade
Right.
school basically, and so I'd see her in the hallways passing. If we stayed there longer, I'd probably have all of her teachers, and they always knew me because my mom worked at that school too.
Yeah.
So moving to like Clarksville and going stateside is different because my mom's not at my school, my sister's not at my school, I'm the only one at my school, and so it's different.
Yeah. You have to, find your own footing in the school,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't, my sister was the same way. She basically, we were at the same school for the most part because she's only a year younger than me. But um she still to this day she's friends with my friends. Like I make I make friends for the two of us. But it's definitely hard being a sibling and having to kind of figure out your own path sometimes because you
Mm-hmm.
can't always rely on your siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, moving and making friends. Like you have to have your own friends and your
Mm-hmm.
sister has to have her own friends.
Yeah.
Especially this will be great for once, your sister moves out and it's just you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you move out and go to college and things like that, or whatever your plans are, you'll have kind of a background
Mm-hmm.
in making your own life for yourself too. What do you think has stuck out to you from the military life? What is one thing that you are like, okay, I'm so thankful for this?
I'm thankful that I get to like experience different cultures that not a lot of other people get to. So people like that aren't in the military, like you're so privileged for being able to go to that place. Like we would never go there. Clarksville's our home. And like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're kind of right. I
Yeah.
like different, but it's a good different because I know that some people might not be able to experience that, and it's cool to experience that type of culture. It's cool to see the new animals that I've never heard of, like
Yeah.
iguanas or banana rats. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely different, but I'm grateful that I got to be a part of that for like a few years of my life.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, it is something that most people don't get to experience. And, you know, while moving sucks and making
Mhm.
new friends is not always the funnest thing to do. And leaving your old friends and, you know, everything terrible and, you know, hard that comes with the military life. It's still so great to be able to look back and be like, I would never have gotten to do this if it wasn't for the military.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those fun experiences and those wild moments, those crazy, you know, animals that, you know, you never would see anywhere else.
Yeah.
My fiance lived in Japan and he said they have banana spiders, which are like huge spiders.
Oh wow.
And I said, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many different animals in different cultures.
Mhm.
But if you had to give one piece of advice to another military child to say whatever you wanted to tell them, what would you say?
I tell them it's gonna be different, but you will like enjoy the place you're at some point, and you're gonna be happy that your family moved there, and you're gonna love it.
Yeah.
From me being a military child.
Yeah. And there are some places where you get to and you're like, all right, when are we going to move? Like, you know, you don't like being there in the moment, but then you leave and you're like, oh, you know, that was actually pretty cool. Like, and there are some places where you never want to leave because you're like, oh my gosh, I love this place. But everyone has to always leave, and you know, at some point or another, or something happens and, you know, you move and it sucks. But, you know, make the most of every moment you have, because it's only going to be there for a second, and then you're going to lose it and move on to something else. Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child and Life. Make sure to set a reminder for every Tuesday to listen to a new episode. You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Grace of a Military Child and Life. If you have any questions or want to be on the podcast, send a message to one of our social media platforms or email grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. See you next week.